Good afternoon. I am so happy to be here today with my friend, Elizabeth Close. Elizabeth is an end-of-life doula, a registered massage therapist, and a somatic experiencing practitioner. Thank you so much for being on the Living Resource Project today, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Tracy. I'm really honored to be here.
So the Living Resource Project is a compassionate communities initiative that serves to remind us that we all have what it takes to show up for the grieving and the dying among us, and that we need each other in this journey of life through death. So Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about what you do to support the dying and their people?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually provide really tangible comfort support for people because I am a registered massage therapist. I provide hands-on gentle treatments for people who are dying and for their family and friends. I do mobile work, so I go into either hospices or people's homes or occasionally hospitals, but that can be a little trickier sometimes for people who are nearing the end of their life, just really gentle treatments in their hospital bed, or I can also bring a reclining chair. And the treatments can really be helpful for physical discomfort, but for emotional discomfort as well.
I love that you offer treatments to the friends and family as well.
Mhm.
That's such a beautiful extension of your
Yeah.
care.
Yeah, and the treatment that most often I provide for family and friends is foot reflexology,
Okay.
although other treatments are possible as well. I bring a really comfortable reclining chair so I
Mhm.
can work on people's heads and neck and shoulders, all the way down their arms and legs.
And touch seems so important for people, especially the people on the end of life journey, because at that time in life, touch is often with the intention of not healing so much as medical interventions and testing and maneuvering the body for changing beds or clothes. And to have this caring, healing touch, I think must just be so supportive on the end of life journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as people's physical function changes as well, for example, maybe not being able to walk anymore,
Mhm.
the touch in the legs and the feet can bring a lot of comfort there as well.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Okay.
Mhm.
Can you share a little bit about how you came to do this work?
So I have been a registered massage therapist since 2012. And before that, I have been working as a registered shiatsu therapist since 2005. So I've been in foot reflexology since then as well. So I've been in this hands-on
Mhm.
profession for a long, long time, and I've always really valued a holistic approach to my work. So that just acknowledges the connections between our body, mind, spirit, and emotions.
Mm.
And it was probably about at least 10 years ago, I really had a sense that I could be a person who can work with people near the end of their lives. It was just a draw to hospice type work, and I didn't act on that feeling right away. But I think it was in 2019 that I took a hospice training and became a volunteer at a hospice. And yeah, it's just a really good fit for me in
Mm.
terms of being able to show up for people who sometimes are in quite distressing situations and a calm, peaceful presence for people near the end of their lives. Yeah. Yeah. And so just a little more about what brought me to blend my massage therapy with end of life doula work. When the pandemic started, I just had a really, the value in myself really solidified of seeing the end of life and death and dying as a really natural part of living. And along with that, I noticed a lot of fear in the general society about death coming up around then. But quite honestly, I also noticed it within myself, the fear of dying, even though I hold this value of dying being a natural part of living.
Mm-hmm.
And so going through that process, it really invited me to look at my own dying experience.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, I have come to a lot of peace in working through actually just a lot of the death anxiety that I was experiencing, and even looking at like details of how I picture my ideal death to be, which has then naturally led me to work in this field with people who are also experiencing this. Yeah.
Amazing. I wish more people knew that. Well, for one, that the fear is normal. It is for anything that we haven't done before. Of course, we're going to be afraid. And then just what you said, how facing that fear and increasing your intimacy with dying and death and challenging the myths and beliefs that you have about it can so often lead to that fear alleviating.
Mhm. So what I really noticed was in my anxiety about my own death was realizing that that anxiety, it is really natural, and that when I'm actually going through my end of life process, I am going to need emotional support
Oh,
for myself, even as much as, now I can say, oh, I worked through this death anxiety. I did, but I am not immune. It will come back at some point, I think, maybe not. But so it just going through that process and seeing that I am going to want support, emotional and spiritual support in my process.
mhm.
And now I can offer that to other people before it's my time.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So, Elizabeth, can you share a story about the work you do? Perhaps a story about a client or a situation that somehow changed you or surprised you, or maybe deepened your intimacy or understanding about the end of life journey.
Yeah, so there's one client in particular who I have worked with for several years as an end of life doula care companion, and also with some of the gentle touch work. So we had built an ongoing relationship, and just to acknowledge that end of life really is a process in my mind rather than a point in time of end of
Mhm.
life. So the story that comes to mind to share just really highlights how natural it is for anger to come up at the end of life as well, anger or agitation in the process of coming to terms with our death and letting go of physical function, mental function. And so this person who I was working with on an ongoing basis, there were several times where some anger came up, and it was sometimes directed what appeared to be at me. And I just was really grateful at being able to widen my view of what was going on, to really see that it was a natural process for this anger to come up for this person, and the beautiful miracle of touch and the part that she played in that as well. And I just had the sense, I wonder if some touch could be helpful to
Mhm.
help shift the energy around what was going on,
Mhm.
to also hold that anger is a really natural part of the experience and that it's welcome in our experience, and to leave the door open for it to shift to something more calm. So I offered her a head massage, and she knew that she was in a state that she would like to shift. And so she was open enough to say yes. And I don't even know if I have words to describe to you how beautiful that was for both of us in connection, to witness that state of anger and agitation just transforming into calm. And it was like much more palpable, like just calm and love between us, in the space between us, all of it. So I had read some research about gentle touch being something that can be used with agitation for people with dementia. And this was a firsthand experience I had of that. So yeah.
That's such a beautiful story. I just say that first. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm very grateful that you bring up the topic of anger, because it's not something that people often talk about when it comes to the dying journey, but it is so common.
Mhm.
And what came to mind was my mom used to say when we were little, as kids, when we were misbehaving, love the unlovable. And
Mhm.
it makes me think of, in that moment, it took a lot, I'm sure, for you to offer that, to love the unlovable, someone that was being so prickly. And then, like you sensed, obviously, she was open because she accepted your touch. So it does say so much. And I think it makes sense that people are angry. It's such a common grief response. And let's face it, on that journey, so much is being taken. Like you said, so much is changing, so much is lost. There's so much to adjust to. And anger is such a normal response to grief. And I also think too, our culture, has such a hard time with anger. And I really was grateful for a definition of anger that I heard by David White, who's a
Oh, yes.
poet,
Mhm.
right? He has a little book called Consolations. And he wrote about anger as the deepest form of compassion for everything about to be lost. And just having that reframe on anger gives compassion, because you start to see, not take it as personally, and to start to understand really what is happening. Because I think in this culture, we just categorize anger as bad, and it's not, it's just an unmet need. I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it actually loops back to your first question about how I support people, because I'm
Mm.
really happy to work with families and just show them ways to approach gentle touch with their own loved ones as well. So more than happy to work with people to give them some skills in that regard as well.
What would that look like? Could you give an example of how you could empower family or friends to use the power of touch to provide care?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we could meet for an hour or two. Just we could do them both at the same time and make it a little mini workshop, or just do an hour, book an hour at a time. And I would go through some of the mental and emotional preparations that, as someone offering touch, that are important to do before you would approach someone. Go over some very basic consent for offering touch, and then just go over some of what that touch looks like. So what it
Okay,
can look like, and a few different areas of the body that could be worked with easily. Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if there was one thing you would want the dying and their people to know, what would it be?
Yeah, the thing that's coming to mind right now is just really holding the miracle of that end of life process, and the miracle of healing in a larger sense. And I guess what I mean by that is that, yeah, when there's things on our heart, emotional things that are feeling unresolved, that they can take but an instant to make connection with that person and have that feel resolved. And maybe added to that, just tying in, is just really holding that gentle touch can be a big part of comforting a restless soul. Yeah.
It really does, touch says so much
Mhm.
beyond words. It's so
Mhm.
incredibly powerful, and we're just wired for it, aren't we? And it's not for everybody, is it? And I think that's important to understand, right? Those that like it a lot, usually, and there's people that are really adverse to being touched.
Mhm. Yeah, just knowing that consent piece is really important, even
Yeah.
when we know someone well. Yeah.
What would that look like? Is it just a simple statement, the
Uh,
consent piece?
yeah, so there can be implicit consent and explicit consent. And so if someone is verbal and they're able to communicate for themselves, and there's different relationships for people as well. So with your partner is different, needs different consent than me working with someone as a professional. If someone is really near the end of their life, then it can be just sensing into a more implicit consent, along with if there are family caregivers around or a medical substitute decision maker, then we can
Mhm.
get consent from that person instead.
Mhm.
But that implicit consent can be really just sensing into what you know of your relationship with that person from the months and years previously, and
Mhm.
knowing what they like. And just really, I mean, it sounds a little too airy-fairy for me to say as a massage therapist, but you can tune into, is this a yes or a no in terms of offering touch?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I assume that if it was a no, there'd be other ways people would communicate, even if it's not verbally, like it might be a
Mhm.
flinch or a tightening or a grimace. Is that your experience?
Yeah, it can be, but sometimes it's even more subtle. Sometimes just without even seeing or noticing, the person offering can just get a sense of maybe some sort of wall or block or whatever it looks like for that person. Somatically within their system, which can be more than just feeling in your body. Some people get an image of a stop sign or an image of a wall or a feeling of moving away. It can look like a lot of different things for different people.
And I imagine that's really important because even if you have that implicit consent based on your previous relationship,
Mhm.
the body changes so much and gets so
Mhm.
sensitive, and pain can increase at end of life.
Mhm.
So being able to be present and really take the lead of the
Mhm.
dying in that very intuitive way and sensing into what is needed in the moment, which, I know for some people, this mention of intuition or sensing seems really abstract unless you've done it. And I really believe all people have the ability to be intuitive or to sense in this way. And I simply think it's paying attention with all of our senses. And I really think sometimes that can be a barrier. They'll say things like, I'm not intuitive or I can't do that. But when you are in the moment and your feet are on the floor and you're in the act of service and really trying to read what the person that you're serving needs, there
Mhm.
does really seem to be this very real compass that guides you to what is needed and not needed. And it's really hard to even talk about or put words around.
Yes. One other thing that comes to mind in terms of offering touch right near the end of life, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it as well. So I often hear of the option of lying in a bed next to your loved one when there's that relationship built, which I think can be really beautiful and can be very appropriate. And one thing that I just think about sometimes is how when people are dying, there's a withdrawal from being here, and there's a withdrawal of even the senses. And I wonder how the touch possibly could hold someone here longer. I don't think this is something that there's like a right or a wrong or a like you never do it or you always do it, but just being aware of that. Is this possibly tying someone here longer who is ready to go, who's ready to withdraw more and not have that. So that's something that plays into my implicit consent as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious about that too.
Mm.
And I agree with you. There is no right or wrong. And again, I think people that are guided to physically touch their person, crawl into bed, whatever.
Mhm.
I do believe that what's really important is the intention. So it's like what you're saying. It all comes down to awareness. If you're in that bed, just grabbing your person because you really don't want them to go, whose need is that about? If you're in there lying beside them and even internally are holding this idea that it's okay for them to go, even though it's hard, I think it's really comes down to the intention and having that awareness around whose need is it about and doing your best to serve the dying. They're always the most important in their dying time. And is this supportive or is this my need? And to explore that would be a good way to be guided in a situation like that.
Mm, absolutely.
So, Elizabeth, what are you dreaming into as you look to the future of death care? Just what's on the horizon for you? Dreaming into what is needed, potential ways that we could meet death with more grace.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll keep the keyword dreaming because I'm not sure how this can all come together. But one thing that I dream about is making myself a registered charity so
Mhm.
that finances are not a barrier for people. Because as much as I'm an RMT, so my services are covered, my touch services are covered by many people's extended health benefits, but not everyone's. And I love the idea of being a charity where people can donate who value the services that end of life doulas and palliative care people more generally provide in a more private sense, and them having the tax receipt for their donation, but then it not, being able to offer services to anyone who needs it without that exchange of money. Um, so that is one thing. And then I also dream of having a community home for people who are dying. Yeah, which is like literally a home in a community. There's a network of people in the United States called the Omega Home Network. And they have a really great framework for opening these homes. That there's more than 50 of them through the States, but none in Canada yet. And so I'm a member of their network and I'm involved with them in seeing what I can get going in British Columbia somewhere.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
so exciting. Maybe you'll be the first,
you never know.
Canadian.
But I
Yeah.
cannot do it alone. So
Call
just
out. Yeah.
in a gathering community of people who also might be interested. The homes are registered charities
Oh,
and there's no set fee for people who are dying to go there. They
amazing.
really fill that gap of when caregivers aren't able to care for their people at home anymore, but the person would rather die in a home environment than a hospital or a retirement community. It's
Wow,
that.
that's really a gap in care. That's beautiful that you're dreaming into seeking to fill that. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
So if
so
anyone's
people are
watching or yeah, listening and you feel called, you can get in touch with Elizabeth to
yeah,
see if you guys can make this dream a reality. It sounds like the framework's there, right? You just need people to support this vision to make it a reality. Yeah.
it's a huge project. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, here's to dreaming. So just as a way to end our time together, I'm going to pull a card from the gratitude deck. It's from the schooloflife.com. It's always nice to end on a note of gratitude. So the first one on the top here looks like some friends kind of goofing around a little bit.
Yeah.
And the message of gratitude is we don't have to take ourselves seriously.
Beautiful.
That's a good one. I like that
Yes.
one.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
really grateful for you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing what you do with the Living Resource Project. And again, if you want to learn more about Elizabeth, you can see our show notes and ways to get in touch with her if you're interested in connecting. So thank you so
Great.
much for being here.
Thank you, Tracy, for everything that you do for the community. You hold such a beautiful space, and yeah, I'm honored to be part of your community of practice.
Oh, thank you. Until we meet again. Bye for now.
Bye.